Hi, and welcome to Studio SN. My name is Sara Naumann, and today we're embossing with Eclectica stamps. This card features a heat embossed focal and a double embossed background, and it's a fun combination that gives your cards texture, color, and sparkle. They're also really easy techniques to do, so let's take a look at the process. Let's start first with our stamped and embossed card focal, this really pretty shiny star on here. So I'll start with a piece of plain white matte cardstock, and of course I need to have my stamps on hand. The stamps that I'm working with are the Eclectica line from PaperArtsy. This is ESN13, and I'm going to use this great big funky heart on here with the script background. Now this is a red rubber mounted cling stamp, so I just pop it onto my clear block and I'm ready to stamp. Now to do my embossing, of course, I need to have my embossing ink, and I'm using the Versamark for this one. I also need my embossing powder on hand. So this is the Pearl Gold Sparkle Embossing Glitter from Wow Embossing. And of course, I also need to have my scrap piece of paper to catch my excess embossing powder so I can return it back into the jar. So here's the process. We're going to take the clear embossing ink and just press it onto the stamp. I always like to take my ink pad to the stamp rather than the other way around. It just feels like it has a little bit more control. And then I'm going to press this down onto my matte white cardstock. Then quickly, working very quickly, I'm going to slip this inside my scrap piece of paper and sprinkle it with that beautiful pearl gold sparkle. And then I'll tap off the excess. You see where I didn't get all of the image on there, and gently tap this off, and then I have that beautiful gold sparkle on here, and I can go ahead and heat set it. So I'm going to move this aside. Of course, then I can use this piece of scrap paper to funnel my embossing powder back into the jar. Now I'm not too worried about having excess embossing powder around the outside edges here this time, because I know I'm going to cut out my image. So I don't need to worry about that. If you are concerned about having some of that excess going on the outside edges, you can just use a dry paintbrush and sweep away some of those. Now I think you can see as I'm adding the heat to this how this is starting to melt. So here's the melted area here. Here is still to be melted. I'll turn this around using my heat tool, and I like to move the heat tool as I'm heating this just so I don't overheat in a certain area. I am working on a craft sheet which protects the surface of my table. And now I have a beautiful shiny star focal on here that I can just go ahead and cut out and add to the front of my card. So now that I have this piece done, I can move on to my background. So I'm going to bring back in another piece of matte white cardstock. I'll move aside some of my gold embossing powder there, and then I can add some gold on here as my background. Now, a similar process, slightly different. I'm going to use a brayer to apply my embossing ink onto this piece of cardstock. So I'll grab a piece of scrap paper again, just so I'm not getting my embossing ink quite everywhere. And again, just open up that embossing ink pad, and I'm rolling my brayer on here. I'm doing it quite lightly, and I will apply the ink quite lightly onto my piece of cardstock. If I wanted it completely covered, of course, I would add heavier coverage. So then I'll come back to my gold sparkle, go back into that area where I tapped off my excess from before, and I can just sprinkle this on here, kind of scoop it on. And you can see I've got a beautiful shiny background. And again, I'll just bring this in to melt. Now, because I've got a bigger surface this time, it will take a little bit longer to get that all melted. The paper does curl. Don't worry, it will flatten. And again, just working slowly and moving that heat tool around until everything is melted. With the glitter embossing powder, I find sometimes you have to tilt your piece a little bit just to see that you've got all of the area melted before you do your second step, which will be to add another color of embossing powder on top of the first. So you can see that that area where I've got the brayered embossing powder and the embossing ink has melted and gives me some really beautiful texture and shine. So I'll give it another second here and turn that off, and you can see how pretty that is. Shiny, simple, and gorgeous. Now you could stop right here if you wanted to, but I'm going to add a little bit more on here. So again, I'll bring in a piece of scrap paper, and the second color I'm using, also from WOW, and this is in the Methylene Violet Regular. So it's not a glitter, it's not something super shiny. It will have a different effect on it, and it's nice to have that contrast. Again, adding a little bit of the embossing ink on here, and again, not covering it completely, but working quickly to get this into a clean piece of scrap paper. And I'll just sprinkle this on here, scoop it back, and tap off any excess. So let me move this out of the way and move my embossing powder, put the cap on of course, and then once again come back and heat set. So you can add as much of the embossing powder on here as you want or as little. So it really depends on the look that you're going for. Now I knew that I wanted to do some stamping on top of this, so I kept it pretty spare. Come around here, whoops, it's flying away. Come back in here and make sure everything is heat set. And what's fun is that this is really not impacting the first layer of embossing powder that I have on here. I'll get this all melted. And there we go. Now you do need to take care, because this is quite hot, and especially if you do a really solid coverage of your embossing powders, do let it sit for a minute before you handle it, because you don't want to, of course, burn your fingers. Now the other thing that I added onto my piece that I put onto the front of my card was edging on here, and I wanted to show that to you as well, because I get questions on that quite a lot. So let me bring back in my piece that still has some of that beautiful violet on here. I'm going to have this open, and I'm going to take again my Versamark, my embossing ink pad, and I'm just going to run this along the edge. I'll start with one edge and then I'll go ahead and do all the rest of them. I'll just tap that in here, and as you can see, now I have some really nice purple edging on here. So again, put that down and then heat set. You can do all four corners in one go if you want to, or you can do them corner by corner. It just depends on what your personal preference is. I tend to do all four corners in one go, and then just go back and see if there's any areas that I need to do again. But just so that you can see on here, let me bring back in this so you can see the contrast on there. It gives you a really nice variegated edge. Now, the last thing I did to complete my background is I wanted to add a little bit of stamping on top, but I didn't want to do more heat embossing. I just wanted it to be a kind of a faint image going across here. So I'm using this piece of sheet music from the same stamp set, and I wanted it to be tone on tone. So instead of using a black or something, I went with the grape. This is the Stephanie Bernard color box, and this is from Clear Snap. And I'll just ink this up and then simply place it down here in the center and lift off. So I didn't want it to be too much of a contrast. I wanted it to kind of blend in with the purple of that embossing powder, and just to provide another horizontal line on here. So after I did that, I actually stamped again to have it going all the way across. And then I had my background and my focal ready to go. So let me bring back in my original card. There you can see that stamped sheet music piece going across here, right underneath my ribbon that I have wrapped around here as well. Here you can also see the purple edging that I did with that embossing powder. So that's how I created the background. Then of course that stamped and embossed star image that's on here This has been added up with foam tape, and that's to prevent it from buckling over this ribbon and also just to give it a little bit of lift. Now this has been mounted onto white cardstock because I wanted that beautiful purple edge to show, then onto teal, onto purple, onto cream, and then put onto the front of the card. Now this quote that I've got on here from Goethe, which is one of my favorites, this is also from that same stamp set, and this has also been stamped with the grape ink. And that's just put up onto cream cardstock and then with a little bit of purple matting top and bottom. 3 gold brads going along the side here, a little bit of ribbon just to add a focal piece to our focal. And you've got a quick and easy, shiny, beautiful card focal and background. So this is how you can create texture and shine with heat embossing and Eclectica stamps. I hope you enjoyed today's show. For more ideas and inspiration, please stop by my website at saranaumann.com. If you enjoyed today's video, I invite you to subscribe to Studio SN on YouTube, and I will keep you updated with a new video every Wednesday. Thank you for joining me on Studio SN, and I will see you again next time.